Hey folks, today we're going to take a look at a game that is currently seeking funding on Kickstarter. That game is called Senatus, and it's from Greymass Games. Now, if you like what you see throughout the rest of this preview video, I'm going to encourage you to go to the official Kickstarter project page. You can do that by following the link in the top corner of your screen, as well as down in the description section underneath this video. You can go there, find out more information than I could possibly tell you here, and hopefully you'll consider backing the project. Now, Senatus is a competitive sort of action selection, sort of kind of worker placement and card action and influence control, territory control type game. That's a lot of stuff, but basically a Euro-style game where you and the other players are part of like secret organizations in ancient Rome around 100 AD when Emperor Trajan is trying to consolidate his power in the city with the help of the Senate. Everything seems to be going well, but you and the other players are trying to subvert that and gain the Emperor's favor by yourself and also gain control of as much of the Senate as possible as well. Now, in game terms, you are actually trying to put your little influence markers all around the board and influence as many of the factions in the city and the senators themselves, buy off the senators, get the favor of the emperor, all in order to get victory points. Now, that's easier said than done, and there is a lot more intricate stuff to explain. So what we're going to do is take a brief look at how the game is played with a prototype version of the game. So just do bear in mind that what you see here may change in the final version, and that's why it's important to go to the Kickstarter page to find out more information. But then in any event, we will come back and discuss it further. Senatus is a competitive action selection and influence control game for 3 to 6 players. Each player belongs to a secret cabal trying to secretly manipulate the Senate in an ancient Rome and eventually gain the favor of Emperor Trajan. Each player will spread their influence carefully to either gain the Emperor's favor, control the Senate, or strengthen or weaken the various factions who run the city. They can use special cards to help their situation, but there's always a danger of gaining corruption, which may come back to haunt you. 3 times during the game, a recess will be called where points are tallied, and whoever has the most points after the 3rd recess will be the winner of the game. Set up the game by first laying out the board. Shuffle the various decks of cards and place them on their spots. At the bottom, there are spots for the faction decks: the plebeians, the peasants and slaves of the city; the artifacts, the builders; the Senatus, the criminal underworld; the mercator, the merchants; the augurs, those who claim to speak to the gods; and the Scholaris, the educated elite. Right near them, there are accompanying faction tracks showing the strength of each of them except for the Senatus. Place cubes on 5 on each track to start. A cube is placed on the round tracker on the side, at the bottom, for a round 0. At the top of the board, several more decks are placed. The Senate Bill and Rider decks are placed in their spots, and the top card of each is flipped up and left on top. Bill cards have an indicator for how many yes votes they start off with, so, based on that, immediately place that many cubes in the yes field on the board. Next, place the Senate deck, then flip 3 cards from it face up into the nearby slots, and place 1 support token on each one. Make a stock of the rest of the tokens nearby, along with the Legion card and the Orator card. The final 2 decks are the Hidden Agendas and the Will of the Senate. Leave the will cards for now, but deal out 3 agenda cards to every player. They secretly choose 1 to keep and leave it face down. The rest are discarded out of the game. Every player also gets a reference card and a set of influence cubes in their chosen color. From those, place a cube on the starting space of the victory point track, which is 5. Then begin the game with a special round 0. Randomly select someone to be the start player, then, in clockwise order, everyone will place 1 of their cubes on one of the 3 areas of influence, either one of the faction areas, the Emperor's favor box, or one of the empty Senate seats, and no player may place a cube on a Senate seat someone else has already placed on. It keeps going around like this until every player has placed 5 cubes. It's important to note what you're aiming for here. At the start of the game, your only guidance is your Hidden Agenda card. At the end of the game, this card will give you some kind of bonus based on how the game ends. For example, some give you bonus victory points if you have majority influence in certain factions, or if some or all factions are at a low enough level, or the card may just give you a bonus to a certain faction's influence to help you out. You can keep this in mind the whole game as you play and let it guide your decisions, and you may gain Hidden Agenda cards later on. Whoever ends up with the most cubes in the Emperor's favor box gets the Orator card, with ties being randomly broken. Whoever has the Orator card at the end of each actual round will be the starting player and resolves the outcomes of all past bills. And now, in round 0, the orator will gain a support token and move one of the factions up or down by 2. Then, every player draws cards from each faction deck equal to the cubes they placed in those particular factions. There is no hand limit. Every round of the game starts with the orator moving the round track up 1 space, and, starting with that player, everyone will take 1 action in clockwise order. It's also possible to use a support token or a special card effect to take 1 additional action, but 2 is the limit, even in that circumstance. There are 5 possible actions you can take with those actions. The first type of action is calling in a favor, which means activating the top and bottom effects of one of the faction cards in your hand. The top right box may have flags that indicate putting yes or no votes in those fields for a current vote, influencing a Senate seat, resolving a will of the Senate card, etc., etc. White flags are optional, but black flags are mandatory and potentially harmful to you, such as will of the Senate cards. After resolving those left to right, the favor underneath is resolved, which is often focused on increasing influence or increasing or reducing the strength of the faction that the card came from. Regardless, using the card in this way may force you to take points of corruption, or in some rare cases, lose corruption, as indicated on the bottom of the card. If you haven't already, place one of your cubes on the corruption track starting from 0, and then adding or subtracting as necessary during the game. If your cube passes a plus or minus point, you will either be forced to lose a cube from your supply to the corruption pool field on the board, or, which happens if you're gaining corruption when you pass one, or take one back from the pool if you're losing corruption and pass one. Will of the Senate cards, by the way, are always bad when you're forced to draw them. The Senate pushes back against your machinations and limits your influences around the board or forces you to take more corruption. Alternatively, another action you can take is using those same faction cards to commit subterfuge. Every card has a faction icon in the top left corner that matches the deck that it came from, the exception being the Senatus deck, which has icons from the other factions and usually your choice of 2. Trading in 2 of the same icon and ignoring everything else on the card will give a special effect, either gaining 2 support tokens for purple icons, reducing your corruption by 3, orange icons, gaining 2 influence on an empty Senate seat, yellow icons, adjusting a faction track up or down by 2, blue icons, or scapegoating another player for, in this case, 2 points, which are green icons, which always means to reduce your corruption by that amount and increase theirs by the same amount. Another action, and another way to use your faction cards, is to control a senator. Discard a number of cards with icons that match what is needed for a face-up senator on the board. Take the senator and its favor token, then resolve the text on the card and the flags in the bottom left corner, and gain or lose corruption as indicated in the bottom right corner. Senators have similar effects to the faction cards, but usually more powerful with regards to gaining or moving around influence or manipulating faction strength. They are discarded after being resolved. Afterward, replace the empty space with another senator card from the deck and another favor token on top of it. Another action option is removing your own influence. You can take up to 2 of your influence cubes back to your stock from anywhere on the board, except for the corruption track and corruption pool. You can even discard additional faction cards to bring back even more influence 1 for 1. Since cubes are limited, this may sometimes be necessary if you need to quickly influence another section of the board and have none left. Finally, you can contact a faction. Place 1 or 2 of your cubes on 1 or 2 factions, then draw cards from their decks accordingly. However, you are not allowed to even look at those cards or add them to your hand until your turn ends, even if afterwards you decide to purchase another action with the favor token. After the 6th, 11th, and 15th rounds, recess is called, and several steps need to be carried out. First, every player starting with the orator may optionally take 1 more action, but at the cost of 3 corruption. Then, the orator alone may take yet another action, but at the cost of 6 corruption. Next, all players in order must remove 1 cube from any faction except the Senatus, if this is possible. The orator then checks to see if the active bill passed, which happens if there are more yeses than nos on the board. If so, he decides how it resolves, usually giving himself a bonus as well as 1 or more other players. If the bill passes, so does the rider, which moves multiple faction tracks up and down at this time. Next for recess, decide the new orator. Once again, whoever has the most influence in the Emperor's favor field will have the title, with ties broken by whoever has the least corruption, and then who is closest to the previous order in clockwise order. The new order gains a support token, adjusts a faction track up or down by 2, and if the same player managed to get Order again, they gain 3 bonus points. Then, score the board. The player with the most influence in the Emperor's favor field gains 5 points, and the one with the least loses 4. The player with the most corruption loses 5, and an additional 4 for every cube they have locked in the corruption pool. Senate seats are the next to score. Whoever controls the most seats gains 15 points, and everyone else who has at least 1 seat gains 6 points. If no one has a majority, everyone gets 6 points if they have at least 1 Senate seat, and an additional 1 for every seat they control. If one player controls the Senatus faction, they gain 8 points, and everyone else with influence there loses 5. If there's no majority, everyone loses 5. Then go through every other faction area, and whoever controls each faction gains points equal to that faction standing on their track. No one gains the points if there is no clear leader in influence. Finally, you get points for unused support tokens, either 1, 2, or 3 points for each token based on which recess it is. After scoring the recess, each player draws another hidden agenda card, and they may keep it at the cost of 3 corruption. And every player draws 1 card from a faction they have influence in, or, barring that, gets 2 support tokens. Finally, remove and replace all senator cards. Play continues like this until the final recess. In addition to all the usual scoring, players reveal any hidden agenda cards they have and resolve them in an order of their choice. With that, players look at their final score, and whoever has the most points is the winner of the game, with ties going to whoever has the least corruption, and further ties resulting in there being no winner. There are also some expansions that may become available for the game depending on the success of the Kickstarter campaign. The Legion card is a way for you to gain points when you don't buy extra actions by locking down your influence cubes and trying to have the most that there is there by the time the recess hits. And the Corruption and Emperor's Favor decks are meant to be used together, and they either replace the way the scoring of those 2 tracks usually works, or they are added to it, conferring additional bonuses to the winners and additional penalties to the losers. That is Senatus. Senatus is a very interesting game with a lot going on. A very heavy strategy game, although not too heavy, which is one of the most interesting things about it. The fact that there are so many deep strategies to be had, but at the same time, it's actually not that difficult a game to understand or to explain once you really have the hang of it, because essentially it's all sort of funneling towards the same thing. You're trying to get as much influence as possible, and there's just a lot of different ways to do that. Tied together with the theme of, with a very interesting theme, by the way, of trying to manipulate the Senate and Emperor Trajan, some historical accuracy there. But probably the most unique thing about this is how the different factions act and react in this game, how you can not only try to go for their cards, which are incredibly powerful, and this is one of those games where you can have a card that can be used in multiple ways and have multiple effects depending on what you use it for, whether you're using it for subterfuge, whether you're using it for its printed effect, the favor and the flags symbols that are on it, and so on. There's so many things you can do with these cards that just having them is so powerful, and consequently it's not very easy to get them either. You have to commit to influencing the different factions. So there's that part of it, but also trying to get, if you can gain control, the most influence on one of the factions by the time one of those recesses comes around, and you've been trying your best to manipulate the tracks, the strength tracks for those factions in your favor, you could have a huge payday of points. But again, that's not easy. You have to juggle a lot of plates in this game, and you only have so many actions. You have one action per round unless you have those favor tokens. Another thing that you have to set up ahead of time, which is one of the reasons why it may be worth it for you to use one of your actions and get rid of one of your faction cards, potentially more than one, to grab one of those senator cards, which can get you a favor token, but also can get you a powerful effect and maybe another favor token, or maybe something else, some other influence on the track. So there's just so many different ways to accomplish your goals But everyone's goals can be different too. And a lot of that is based on your hidden agenda cards. A very small, relatively speaking, part of the game, but has a huge impact on the game because it gives you that guidance. You may even get more later. There's so much to talk about. There's the corruption track as well. That's a risk-reward thing. How high are you willing to go on the track to get some powerful effects? There's a lot of very powerful faction cards that are going to require you to take a lot of corruption. Same thing with some of the senators. This is a very risky thing to do, especially since even if you can sort of skirt the boundaries to stay in maybe second place, so you don't gain any points for having the most, at least corruption, but you don't lose any for having the most either. But you still might have enough that if you get to one of those plus-minus points and you're gaining corruption, that you lock down your influence cubes. You don't have a lot of cubes. It seems like you do when you see in that part of the video where it just shows people with a bunch of cubes near their cards. But in reality, from the very beginning of the game during the setup, you're getting rid of 5 of them, putting them on the board. And that's why at times you even have to bring cubes back. Like, okay, I can see that I'm not going to get this faction. Let me try and get this one instead. Boy, there's just so much. The whole recess section where it's not just enough to be playing the game and then make it to the end. There are these recesses where you score points then. So it's just like a rush. You have to get as much influence out there and build your plan as much as possible in just a few rounds, because their recess is coming and it's getting tighter and tighter as time goes on. It takes less rounds to get to the next recess and so on. And then there's the bill and the rider. Being the orator, I haven't even touched on that. So important, so critical, but not easy. You need to spend some of your influence cubes just to get the Emperor's favor. Is that totally worth it to you? Maybe, because you get the benefit of the bill and can get all these other things. Potentially the favor token, you can manipulate a track of your choice up or down. But again, that's more resources and more time and more valuable actions you need to spend. So my point is, there's so many different avenues to getting points in this game that you can play it however you like. And one game can be different than the next. You say, all right, this game, I want to try something a little bit different. I want to focus on just pure getting faction control as much as possible. Screw the Orator, screw getting the Senate, whatever. Not in the Senate seats even. Forget it, want to go for this. Other games, you might dabble in a few different things and hope that it all works out for you. And maybe people don't think you're doing too well, but you're actually doing really great. So really, ton going on here, but again, it's not an overwhelming game compared to a lot of other Euro games that I've played. It's actually pretty straightforward, and the theme really helps that along as well. So, if any of that appeals to you, if this appeals to you or someone that you know, if you like heavy strategic games, but yet a little more accessible than some other ones, and you like the theme, don't take my word for it. Go to the official Kickstarter project page and find out even more information. You can do that by following the link in the top corner of your screen, as well as down in the description section underneath this video. That is Senatus from Grey Mass Games. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, for supporting our sponsors.